Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Up for Growth 2021 Virtual Summit for Housing Changemakers. My name is Mike Kingsella, CEO of Up for Growth, and this is the Millennial State Electeds on the Politics of Zoning panel. Before I send this over to Jennifer LeSar, our moderator, I'd like to give a brief overview of Up for Growth, an organization that believes that housing should always be an opportunity, never an obstacle. Up for Growth is a national cross-sector member network committed to solving the housing shortage and affordability crisis through data-driven research and evidence-based policy. Up for Growth provides timely research and insights on housing policy at the local, state, and federal levels to its members, along with networking opportunities at events like these. Membership is open to organizations of all sizes, and if you'd like to learn more, you can navigate to the link shown at the bottom of this slide. I encourage you to do so. And without further ado, I'd love to hand this over to Jennifer LeSar, a board member with Up for Growth and the head of the Global Policy Leadership Academy, doing very important work on educating around issues related to housing policy solutions at the local, state, and federal level as well. So Jennifer, I'd like to ask you to take it away.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are in the country. As Mike said, I'm a board member here at Up for Growth, and I and my firm work on forging structural solutions to end the housing affordability and homelessness crises in California and beyond. I hope you are all able to just hear Washington Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck speak about his 7 principles on the housing crisis. He was phenomenal, and I thought his framework was so useful. We have 3 very dynamic panelists here today, and when I learned that they are, and I'm not going to out any of them, but when I learned that they were 33, 31, and not even 30, I thought, I always say in California, this housing crisis is the crisis of people in their 20s and 30s, and anybody who hasn't had a chance to be a homeowner. And so elevating actually millennial leaders is one of my favorite things to do. And they're all in their final years of their terms in their state offices. So today we're going to hear about their state's challenges, learn from their wisdom from their time in office, and talk about barriers and solutions related to the politics of moving policy to address housing supply and access challenges. As I hope you all know, and as Mike said, Up for Growth forges policies and partnerships to achieve housing equity, eliminate systemic barriers, and create more homes. And our panelists today are all working to move pro-housing agendas that work for communities of all sizes across their states. And here at Up for Growth, that's what we want. We want to work for housing for all communities of all sizes, and we work, of course, across the country. So let me introduce them and get us started. First, from the state of Maine, the Honorable Ryan Fecteau, who is Speaker of the House. From Virginia, the Honorable Ibraheem Samirah, who's a delegate. Also a dentist, so I asked him if he was Dr. Delegate or Delegate Doctor, but he assures me he's just Delegate Samirah, DMD, and Senator and Honorable Matt Hansen from the state of Nebraska. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, as I think you all are in Central and Eastern Standard zones. So let me just share what we're going to do today, and then we're going to have the panelists share a little bit about their state in a minute. So we're going to do 3 or 4 rounds, topical rounds of questions, ranging from sort of 2 minutes in the first 2 rounds and going a little deeper into policy, around 3 minutes in the second rounds, and third and fourth rounds. And we're going to save about 10 minutes for question and answers at the end. And I know our Up for Growth policy staff are going to curate questions for all of you. So that's the plan. As part of introducing yourselves, and we're going to start with Speaker Fecteau and then go to Senator Hansen and then to Delegate Samirah in the first round. I'd just like to sort of frame for today. So share what part of your state you represent. Is it suburban, urban, rural? And then just give us an overview of housing in your state. What does it cost? How does that relate to income? And how has COVID impacted housing issues in your state? So, Mr. Speaker, why don't you go first?
Happy to. Thank you for having us, and really appreciate Up for Growth for hosting this event and drawing attention as they do across the country to the issue of affordable housing. The situation here in Maine is not unlike what I think a lot of places are experiencing. I represent Biddeford in the state legislature. Biddeford is my hometown where I grew up. It's a mill town that was a town that exists because of textile mills that were built in the 1800s. Those have long shuttered. The textile mill operation is no longer in operation, but we are experiencing a revitalization in my community as a result of the growth in Portland, Maine, which is our largest city. So I'm in a suburban community. For Maine, we're one of the largest cities, but as you all know, by Maine standards, our large cities are nowhere near large cities in other states. And we're experiencing both a boom in terms of economic development, but simultaneously at the same time concurrently having a crunch on affordable housing. The average home sale in Maine this year is creeping over $300,000. In 2019, before the pandemic, that was $225,000. So a $75,000 increase. In Cumberland County, our largest county, the increase has gone from it's $425,000 this year, which was just over $300,000 2 years ago, back in 2019. So we're seeing a real crunch in the housing market, with prices increasing rather substantially. The average household income, median household income, is $58,000. So it gives you a sense of, statewide, what families are earning, and at the same time what the picture looks like on the housing front.
Thank you, Speaker Fecteau. Senator Hansen, what's going on in Nebraska? Tell us about your district and your state's challenges.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, and thank you all for having me today. So I represent District 26, which is the northeast part of Lincoln, our state capital and second largest city. We've actually just finished redistricting in the past hour. So my district, as of the signature of the governor, has changed from having both being urban and bleeding out into the suburbs to shifting back to being solely an urban neighborhood. A lot of my core neighborhoods are kind of historical towns that have been since annexed by the city of Lincoln, going back, including, Havelock, which is an old railroad town, and others that were, independent towns that have been annexed in the 1920s and 30s by the city of Lincoln. So representing a significant number of core neighborhoods. And we are seeing a lot of the similar things. In Nebraska, kind of the fair market rate for a 2-bedroom unit is $879, and that certainly can be higher in places like Lincoln and Omaha, some of our larger cities, depending on the exact need and area. We've seen a lot of kind of disparate impacts on different groups over the course of time. Pre-COVID, we had a kind of state chamber-led plan called Blueprint Nebraska that looked and said, we are about 50,000 housing units short in Nebraska overall. And this is as of 2019. And obviously all of the disruptions to everything from COVID, including just the basics of lumber and concrete, we are struggling to catch up to that number. And I worry that it is growing in the sense that we are not able to build and continue out the amount of units that we simply need.
Thank you. What's been the impact on COVID in Nebraska, if I can ask? 'Cause I know when talking to Speaker Fecteau, not only have they had a lot of price increase in Maine, but Mr. Speaker, I remember that your state's residents were feeling the pinch by residents of other states coming in, states that were more healthy, wealthy housing, bringing that equity in and driving prices up in Maine. Senator Hansen, did COVID have any impact on Nebraska in terms of housing prices or the impact on your residents?
Yes, definitely. As we've seen, just like everywhere in the country, our housing stock is limited, and it's not uncommon to hear the anecdotes that houses are being asked above asking price the same day they're listed. And I think that's a kind of a unique problem, not a unique problem, including here. We've been seeing that over and over.
Thank you. Delegate Samirah, you hail from Virginia. Welcome. Tell us what's going on. What kind of district do you have, and what's been happening in Virginia in terms of, incomes, housing price escalation, and the impacts of COVID?
Well, I have a district that, first of all, thank you so much for Up for Growth and Jennifer and everybody involved in this wonderful work nationwide. I applaud it, and that it's bringing together a lot of unique minds, and we're working on a very important issue. And it has so many layers. I'll say my district is a suburban district right now with an old town feel prior to the suburban development. It's like a Bedford, but expanded. Around it with a big airport, Dulles Airport, and the White House being 30 minutes driving distance away. It is slowly turning more like a metropolitan area. We have cities being planned for the future. Might have heard of Tyson's Corner. It's become Tyson City now, and it's going to continue to grow in that fashion. And we're not too far away from that. We have 2 metro stations that are about to open up. They haven't opened up yet. And lots of transit coming in and out of the area in general. It's the average house, I'd say, is anywhere between $500,000 to $600,000 for a single family home. Income level, I'd say somewhere around, well, let's just say 80% of average median income, since we're going to get technical eventually, is around $70,000. So average person is making about $70,000 a year. And we are short hundreds of thousands of units of affordable quality units in Northern Virginia overall. The Northern Virginia, which the district that I represent is a part of, is home to the 2 wealthiest counties per average income in the country, Loudoun and Fairfax County, and I'm situated in Fairfax County. And housing prices have skyrocketed since COVID started, and as well as rents.
Thank you. One of the things I hear from both of you, and this is one of the ways we look at affordability across the country, is actually right to compare is what is the ratio of the average income to the average housing price. And Speaker Fecteau, your ratio in Maine seems to be a factor of about 6. Delegate Samirah, your factor in Virginia is almost 9. Our factor here in California is about 8. And so, right, as that ratio, because we know wages are pretty stagnant, gets bigger and bigger, this housing crisis just gets worse and worse. So let's talk about what you're trying to achieve with your housing policy. So when it comes to focusing on land use and zoning, or planning, what are the things that when you move legislation, you're trying to address in meeting the shortage of housing units? And Delegate Samirah, we'll start with you. What's the focus of your policy and of your colleagues in your legislature?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. I'll say the focus has been, unfortunately, to focus on putting more money into the housing trust funds as the only solution. We have a trust fund that has been supplemented by companies, but as well as the state legislature through the budget. Companies like Amazon that have decided to move their headquarters or to add a headquarters in Virginia have added to the housing trust fund, albeit not enough to overcome the problem that we have that is more structural in nature. If we're only going to use money, we're going to get a lot more money than what is already there. So the issues that I present to my colleagues are ones that have to do with zoning. That's primarily the biggest problem. There's a lot of good areas to build out in Northern Virginia that are very close to DC that have not been utilized much. And that includes areas in Arlington County and Alexandria County, which are bordering DC, that are a lot of areas that just are one house on 10 acres. And the further you move out into the suburbs, you find that houses are on eighth acres or quarter acres. And so we have a problem there because a lot of people have owned those properties for a very long time. And the needle has not been moved on the issue enough to address the issue of zoning. And so the conversation that's very focused on in Virginia and in Northern Virginia is what are the impacts of having bad zoning on the books, on the environment, or on racial justice, and beyond.
So with your work on zoning, are you trying to address issues of density or of access or of equity or of diversity of opportunity in neighborhoods? What are the sort of things you're trying to hit with your zoning work?
Of course, the primary purpose of the work is to, of course, make life more livable for everyday Virginians, first and foremost. Being two of the wealthiest counties in the country, the average is skewed very high because of there being such high wealth. But there's a lot of people in between all this wealth that are poor, that are struggling, that are working the day-to-day jobs that we need in Northern Virginia to sustain. Teachers are unable to work in Northern Virginia, and a lot of teachers are driving in from West Virginia, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive. I have my mother, she's a teacher, and she certainly cannot afford to live alone, and I actually house her with me. And of course, it's lovely to have a multi-generational kind of home, but at the end of the day, she'd rather live alone. She'd rather not have to live with me and feel like she's a burden on me getting married or something. That being said, the conversation extends beyond just cost of living, of owning a home or renting a home, because at the end of the day, there is primarily white neighborhoods and there's primarily non-white neighborhoods in Northern Virginia. There are areas that people have to drive to all the time, back and forth to, as people that live there, and there are areas where people can walk and bike and commute using metro or bus. So the conversation extends beyond that, and it does have tentacles, and it does appear differently for different communities.
Okay.
So I hear complaints all the time from people of color that are trying to move into neighborhoods in my district that sometimes will say, well, the door was shut on me and I couldn't outbid the other person. And it just seems like everybody that's able to bid and successfully bid happens to be more white than the rest of the population, percentage-wise, and that's what the numbers tell us. And then for others, it's being conscious of the fact that sprawl is going to destroy their area's nature. There are lots of forestries that are being taken down, but also being conscious of the fact that seawater levels are rising, and there's all these crazy happenings with climate. Seeing all the smoke and fog coming from the West Coast to all the way to Virginia has shook people to their core. In that conversation for about 5-10 days, there was just smog. So people are beginning to realize that there's a lot of tentacles to the affordable housing crisis, and it's not just power plants that need to reform. It's also our housing systems need to reform. Yeah.
Thank you. And certainly all these systems are so deeply connected. Let's move to Maine. Speaker Fecteau. You work on land use and zoning and planning issues. What are the big things you're really trying to accomplish to address the housing crisis in your state?
Yeah, well, I quickly will back up and just say that you mentioned the COVID impact, and Maine has had a unique experience where we're one of the top states in the country for in-migration in 2020, which is something I don't think we've experienced in a long time. We've had a declining population. We're one of the oldest states in the country. Population-wise, we were third in the nation last year for people moving to our state from other places across the country, primarily Massachusetts, New York, and California. So folks moving from West Coast to East Coast and coming to Maine with a lot more money in their pockets and their bank accounts than Mainers have to spend on homes and purchase land. So that's been a unique challenge. But in the legislature, we've been focused on finding ways to address this both from a policy perspective and from an investment perspective. So in 2020, I sponsored a bill that passed that mirrors the federal low-income housing tax credit. It allowed us to leverage additional federal dollars that were on the table, but we couldn't get to because we didn't have a credit that mirrored the federal program. That bill passed, was signed to law by the governor. The photos above me. It is the single largest investment in affordable housing that our state has ever made at any time in its history. So it was a huge step in the right direction. It doubled our production. I'm actually going to be visiting the site of the first project that's a result of those funds. So we're really excited about that. And then right now, in fact, I'm missing one of our fourth meeting of the commission. We have a commission looking at zoning and land use policy, trying to find a way to create both incentives and perhaps some sticks to incentivize and motivate our municipalities to change their zoning and land use restrictions. In too many communities, there are policies that have been on the books for a long time that are preventing housing from being built in the first place. I talk to folks, practitioners in affordable housing, who won't even consider proposing a project in some communities because they know it is a complete waste of time, given the policies that exist in the city or town. And we need to change those things. We need to make sure that we are welcoming the construction of new units. In Maine, we need 20,000 new units to keep up with the demand. We are building on average 250 units per year. We have a lot of work to do. Our goal is to have 1,000 units built per year. We're too far behind. We need to attack this from all angles.
So trying to ramp up production by about fourfold annually, and looking at carrots and sticks. And I saw Senator Hansen nod when you said carrots and sticks. Senator Hansen, what are you working on in Nebraska on land use and zoning to really move the needle there? What are sort of the top priorities that are feasible politically?
Yes, absolutely. So we're very successful in 2020 to pass our act on municipal density and missing middle housing. Initially, I had proposed a kind of statewide preemption to allow for missing middle density housing across the state. Over time, working with a number of senators, we ultimately merged several different housing bills together. And what we're doing now is requiring all cities to have affordable housing action plans, as well as to report frequently to the legislature on the status of their housing, including their zoning policies and the growth in housing, and among a lot of different metrics over the prior year. This has kind of stemmed from conversations that both me and Senator Wayne, who was our chairman of our Urban Affairs Committee, who looks at housing and municipal and city issues, we're both working on this issue kind of from different approaches. And we found that simply there were some cities in Nebraska who were probably very good stakeholders and were very conscious of their role in promoting access to housing. And there were other cities who simply weren't and didn't view it as a job, or worse, viewed it as a nuisance or something they didn't want to deal with. And so our first step in Nebraska has been to get the cities to the table and have an understanding that you need to have a public plan. You need to acknowledge what your zoning, what role your zoning plays in that plan, and you need to know that ensuring that your cities are affordable, accessible, livable is a job that we expect our cities to be involved in.
So I want to turn in, Senator Hansen. I want to stay with you to kind of move to the next topic, and I'm very interested in kind of what you're doing to motivate your cities. But let's talk specifically about politics. Who supports in your state? Who opposes? What kind of partnerships have you been able to forge that might be unique? How are you, putting it together to move your legislation, and talk either about some of the hard-won successes in that journey, or even some of the things that you haven't been able to get done because you can't put the alliances together yet. And Senator Hansen, you're unique in that you have a unicameral government there. unique on this panel here, but would love to hear how do you do it in Nebraska? How do you put those partnerships together on the really tough issues? And where are you having success, and where are you still confronting some barriers?
Sure. No, absolutely. No, happy to talk about it, and love kind of being an advocate and praising our unique unicameral. So in addition to being unicameral, because of that, we're also the smallest state legislature. We have 49 members, period. And it's, it's just us working on policy. And there's some kind of unique opportunities there to build bridges, including kind of across ideology, perspective, background, geography. One of the things that we've been really successful working with is there's been a lot of business groups who have been recognizing that the barriers to kind of growing our workforce is often tied to housing, in the sense that enticing and recruiting new employees and new workers to the state of Nebraska is facing strict barriers because there's simply not places for them to live. Nebraska is, I think, consistently one of the lowest unemployments in the country, and including we just hit our lowest unemployment in our state's history this past month. And I know there's reasons for that aren't always the best reasons, including people dropping out of the workforce. But that's kind of realistically the state that we're in. And so we have a lot of groups who are very interested in growing the housing stock, who might not necessarily traditionally view that as a role or a duty of them. And so bridging some of that, because when you get to the point where you're having nonprofits who are interested in growing, and promoting kind of economic justice, along with more business groups who are interested in growing the workforce, and everybody looks and it's like we have too few affordable rental units in our city. That gets kind of some unique allies together and working forward. And that was the real backbone for the bill I mentioned earlier. Was we had, obviously, cities didn't necessarily alike or weren't interested in preemption or additional oversight, but when you kind of had a unified front of people from so many different perspectives saying, nope, we really do feel that there's some zoning policies inhibiting the growth of our city because we are not addressing housing affordability. That's been a really unique spot to work from.
Right. Thanks. I always, in California, we have an interesting experience with business where it's the same issue. Of course, it's inhibiting growth, but business is also very afraid to own the problem. And we've been working on it for years. And I'm always just curious, how we bring business into this important advocacy, effort. Speaker Fecteau, what are the politics like in Maine, and how are you putting it together to move good legislation, and where are you still having challenges in building the coalitions?
Well, I think if you think of a town meeting that you've ever been to, where you have a proposed project and there are folks on one side and folks on another, you can pretty much imagine the kind of conversations that we have here. It's whenever something is being proposed near someone and they don't want the change to occur, it really scares people. And I think that's some of the same conversations we're having here. We're seeing projects, for example, Cape Elizabeth, one of the most wealthy communities in our state, home to Port of the Headlight, the iconic lighthouse that you've probably seen with anything related to Maine. They have a project that will be affordable housing, and it's being met by extreme opposition because it's a community that hasn't had affordable housing projects or multi-unit buildings built at all, really. I mean, you're talking about single-family homes that are upwards of $1 million+ and a project like this is just met with extreme resistance because it's threat to the value of those homes. On the other side of this, however, there is a moment here. I think this is something that is probably a common theme across all states right now. There's a coalition developing of unlikely allies who know and see that this is an issue that cannot be ignored any longer. And that includes municipalities. In Maine, we have a strong tradition of local control. Municipal leaders do not like being told by the state what to do, but they welcomed this conversation that we're having at the commission level right now because they see that a lack of affordable housing production is holding their communities back. It is causing people in Maine to travel long distances to work, which is a huge issue here. We have people, Delegate Samirah mentioned it, people driving out an hour and a half, 2 hours from their home to their workplace. In Maine, transportation is our #1 contributor in emissions. So when we talk about global warming and climate change, this is all interconnected, and we have a coalition at the table, I think, that may not agree on all the solutions, but are working towards finding solutions that will address these problems. So I think, despite the fact that they're the same kind of folks that you'd expect to show up, who are going to be opposed to removing some of the barriers, while they're there, they're still there, and they're definitely making themselves known. I think there's an opportunity here. There's a crack in the foundation that's allowing us to sort of rethink how we can attack this issue with the right people at the table. I think we will have a better solution as a result of who's at the table. I'll mention one other thing. The mayor of Auburn, Maine, next to Lewiston, one of our largest cities, Republican mayor, he has led the effort in probably the most expansive and all-encompassing reform of zoning and land use in any municipality in recent memory in our state. So I think this issue also cuts across party lines. And I think that's important to remember too. I think we think of affordable housing and advocacy to be a liberal issue. The mayor of Auburn proves that that's not the case. He has reduced the number of zones in Auburn from 32 to 8. That is a huge improvement. Getting rid of parking requirements across the board, allowing ADUs without restriction. Those are the kinds of changes we want to make statewide. And the Auburn mayor, a Republican, has provided the blueprint for us.
That's terrific to hear. And I've got some thoughts on local control that maybe I'll share a little later that I want to ask you all about. But Delegate Samirah, how are you putting it together in Virginia? What's the coalition building like? Are there strange bedfellows? How are you busting through some of the barriers?
Well, it started off with there being nobody really thinking about it as of recent. The last person to have introduced a piece of legislation was the speaker at the time, Republican Speaker Bill Howell, in 2012 or 2013, and it was brought to him by the realtor community plus developers, and his bill got killed. And I don't know about Speaker Fecteau, but in Virginia, the speakers, they rule with an iron fist. So to have the speaker's bill as a Republican, with obviously a lot of underlying resolutions of affordable housing problems in primarily Democratic areas in Northern Virginia, was somewhat something to look at for myself before I jumped into it. But what ended up happening was I began by introducing a statewide upzoning bill. Anybody that has a single family home should be allowed to rezone for a two-family zone property. That was met with all sorts of responses across the political spectrum, from the left to the right. Ironically, a lot of people on the right actually were supportive, lowercase c conservatives. So although I am a self-professed progressive, coming into this conversation, some of the staunchest conservatives in the state were on my side, as well as researchers in our university systems in Virginia. They were also there, Marquetta Center and George Mason University, as well as the researchers for a lot of the stakeholders that were there. But where I started hitting the walls was the people that were lobbying on behalf of the entities that wanted to, that their researchers were saying we should move this zoning conversation forward. We should allow those that want to upzone if they would like to with their own properties. because there seems to be a cultural issue at play. It seems to be that there's always a reason why we shouldn't upzone. And at the crux of it, I think a lot of my colleagues do come from local government. They have had experiences at the local level, and they bring that with them to the higher level conversations, not realizing that that those voices at the local level, when they were elected at the local level, were skewed in favor of people that have the time to show up to a local meeting, a local ordinance meeting. Most of my constituents, I'd say 99.9% of my constituents, do not know how to get to a local ordinance meeting, or to have a conversation about zoning, or to go through the application process and beyond. But what has happened as a result was the dynamic of local politics changed significantly because of that piece of legislation, because it created so much conversation and so much, I think, good controversy at the local level, where they started discussing, well, you know, do we want to lose our authority at the local level to do something that's so primary to our role as local elected officials? Do we want to lose relevance as local elected officials as a result of a state elected official saying that they're going to do it themselves instead of the locals doing it? And so the response has been tremendous at the local level. Out of the 5 Northern Virginia counties, I believe that 4 of them or 3 of them have enacted parking requirement reductions, accessory dwelling unit ordinances, and they have transformed some big shopping centers into zone 4 housing. And they've also changed some motels, hotels that have not been doing so well to become affordable housing. So I'm not able to take any direct credit for it. I'm proud of the shift in the conversation. And I believe that will continue to happen, because now there's a little bit of politics involved. Now it's incumbent upon the rest of the state's elected officials to realize that. And that's where I'm going to continue to hit roadblocks now and in the future. Even if, the researchers of these groups that are interested in moving the conversation forward on development and housing are on board. Their lobbyists are, they are tied in relationships with a lot of elected officials. And a lot of elected officials, unfortunately, due to the part-time legislature nature, are wealthier, more privileged, and they do fear that their property values will drop. And so these people are humans at the end of the day, and the conversation needs to be had with them. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that it's representative of what the people need, but that's the reality in Virginia. It's going to take a lot of time to change that conversation, but it's already begun.
You know, I want to just follow up on that. And first, I want to say to everybody listening, if you have questions, please indicate so through the chat, even if you don't want to put your question in, but just that you have some, and we'll take a break and go to questions. But until I see some, I'm going to ask a follow-up, and we've got one more sort of round here to go. But again, I'd like to give that opportunity for questions. So I'm going to start with just a follow-up question and see if anything comes in. So I want to talk actually about local control and how you experience it in your state. And by the way, we just had a very big bill, Delegate to Samirah, to your sort of a nod to you on this conversation around ADUs, because you're either the killer of single family neighborhoods, right? Or you're the promoter of gentle density, multi-generational wealth building, right? And entry level housing. And in California, you can do some of it as home ownership too, and you can even split your lot. So I that local control, and then that killer of zoning, gentle density, or killer of single family neighborhoods is quite the polarization of the dialogue. A couple years ago, I facilitated for about 18 months a process in the 9 counties in the Bay Area here in California, which is about 7.5 million people. And people think California is big, but the truth is California has almost 500 cities, and almost all of them are small, right? So take out the handful of big ones. And what we know here is that in a lot of places, if you're pro-housing, you can't hang on to your seat. You get voted out of office, right? And whole small city councils will get voted out. And so as part of that process, we did as this part of this convening, we did a lot of polling and surveying of in the small cities of city managers, planning directors, community development directors, and elected officials. And so many of them said, we really want the state to do the hard work because we can't, right? If we do the hard work, we're going to lose our jobs, we're going to get voted out of office, and the politics of small cities will change. And I hear a little bit of that, Senator Hansen, you're talking about, the workforce housing and the movable middle. Speaker Fecteau, I suspect your state credit is probably a low income housing credit. Is that right? Right. And Delegate Samirah, I know you're working on sort of density and kind of housing for all, but what do you hear as state legislators? Do people want you to do this hard work? And what are the consequences for local officials if you don't do it? And Senator Hansen, we'll start with you. What do local officials? How does that play out in Nebraska?
Yeah. We do see a fair amount of kind of different things. And that was one of the ways that I've actually been glad to see some of the early results of the bill we did pass, where we see the kind of the drastic differences that some cities take. And I think that was kind of anecdotally, people who really worked in the field could tell you, but could maybe have a hard time putting their finger on it. And to have it kind of so publicly declared and written down and disclosed, it's able to compare and contrast cities. So even just, for example, comparing Lincoln and Omaha in our state, our two largest cities, Lincoln tends to, be, was kind of one of the leaders in having an affordable action plan, and is pretty good at working on developments and having a variety of different things. Conversely, part of the reason we went down this route is Omaha, our largest city, was pretty hands-off with housing and would actually not let much housing be developed inside its city limits at all, and then kind of instead would choose to cherry pick which neighborhoods were built outside of the county, basically picking different HOAs to annex occasionally. And that was kind of a different position, kind of in a lot of people's minds, an abdication of, in my mind, an abdication of leadership on housing policy. I think a little bit the state stepping in and being a little bit of the bad guy or the fall guy, or however you want to pitch it, and saying, oh, we have to do affordable housing plan because the state told us we must, as opposed to gives at least some local officials a little bit of cover, regardless of how they initially felt, whether or not this was an issue they were passionate about or begrudgingly doing. They can at least kind of stave off that first awkward conversation with some constituents by, blaming the state legislature. And sometimes I see some head nods. Sometimes with our kind of federal system, and then kind of our somewhat federal system at the state level, sometimes you just need a higher person up to be the fall guy to actually get some policy to do. And that was something I think we in the Nebraska legislature were happy to do.
I see a lot of head nodding there. Speaker Fecteau, you're nodding your head. How does that play out? Is the state the fall guy for doing the tough things in Maine?
Well, it's harder to pass things that are mandates on municipalities in Maine because it requires a 2/3 vote in the House and Senate. So we struggle with municipal mandates. Otherwise, it would probably be a lot easier for us to have this conversation. But I think what the senator was just talking about is so relevant to this conversation, because what ends up happening at the local level is the people who are the loudest and often the angriest show up at a town meeting, and there's sort of this paralysis amongst the elected officials because they don't want to take the action that would cause those people who are upset and angry from either keep coming back or from saying, hey, you made a decision about our community. We were the only ones that showed up. We were opposed to what was being proposed. No one showed up, or very few people showed up as proponents, and you still made the decision to go against what we advocated against. And so there's that constant challenge, because obviously the people that are going to be living in these affordable projects, they might not even be residents of the community yet. They might work in the community. I think Cape Elizabeth is a good example. The opponents there saying, what's considered affordable in Cape Elizabeth is not the same as what's affordable in other communities. There aren't any low-income people that live here. Well, first of all, we know that's not true. We have census data that says there are low-income people living in Cape Elizabeth, but we certainly know that there are low-income people working in Cape Elizabeth, working in restaurants, working at the local convenience store and gas station, and so on and so forth. And they are commuting to those communities every day. So yeah, they might not be showing up at town meeting regarding changes to zoning because they first of all maybe aren't a resident, and maybe they don't feel like it's their place to come to a meeting when they're not a resident, or they're busy and they're working and they barely have time to pick their kids up from school. Those are the real challenges that we have when we talk about how local leaders are making decisions, and not to mention a lot of the zoning decisions get made by a zoning board. At least in Maine, those folks are volunteers. They meet maybe twice a month. They are very busy. They have their own lives. They're not professionals. They're not being paid, or they're being paid very, very little to be there. And so you have folks that are basically coming in, doing their meeting, clearing the agenda, and they're not thinking about should we take the time to analyze our zoning ordinances? Should we really do this thorough review and see what's working and what's not working? That's not their job, or at least it's not been their job. I think we are moving towards a place where we can get these revisions and these changes to occur, but for a long time, that's just not been the case.
Thank you for that, and I see Delegate Samirah nodding a lot. Delegate Samirah, let me ask: are you finding any success in bringing those voices, the voices of really the low income and working parts of your state to the table, so that either at the local level or the state level, you feel like you can have strong advocacy coalitions that are present in all these discussions? How are you able to make some ground forward there on that?
I think a big part of that particular issue that you're speaking of is that there is such a stark difference in reality for people that are poor or lower income in Northern Virginia than people that are wealthy. And so a lot of the pushes on housing for lower income communities in Northern Virginia has been focused on preventing eviction.
Wow.
So I've been, fighting with communities that are not in my district in Northern Virginia to make sure that they are not evicted by, big, housing development orgs, companies, et cetera, that are, for example, owned by Fannie Mae. So that's a big push for a lot of lower income communities that want to develop a tenant union to protect themselves against being evicted around the areas of Amazon. So it's a little bit more of a stark kind of reality. I try to, as much as possible, bridge in the narrative. I think, unfortunately, also a lot of the people that are pushing for housing initiatives are also a bit willing to do the easy part. So I see I represent parts of Loudoun County, and in Loudoun County right now, there's a fight to make sure that the zoning around a mobile park home community stays, the way it is for mobile park home owners, that people that are living there. And, that's an easy, fight because it's such a small section of the housing market. But the bigger section of the housing market that needs to be, really focused on is around metro stations, is around transit stops, getting those areas more heavily, more high density, so that we can actually center our transportation systems, which are obnoxious in Northern Virginia. I mean, traveling just 10 miles is about a 35, 40-minute drive. So, we have a serious problem with trying to bridge over the conversation. Also, I'll say the 2020 presidential election was a little bit of a game changer in the partisan politics. It definitely was not a great thing for former President Trump to go out there and say, there's an attack on the suburbs with zoning. they're coming after your houses in the suburbs. That really made the conversation partisan. I'll say my conversations with a lot of people that are in the development community, in the realtor community, changed significantly after that. A lot of fear. And going back to I think the earlier question, which was, has there been a conversation, or has there been an attempt to let me be the fall guy at the state level, and so that the locals can, say, oh, we're being pushed to do this. I have tried that. I have tried it in private, and I'm happy to say it in public now because it didn't work, unfortunately, which is to tell them, hey, let me be the bad guy. Don't worry about me. My elections have a higher turnout. I can withstand the pressure. I can get your support on board. We can move this forward electorally. Don't worry about me. And I did not receive any support from the local supervisors. I did receive a form of support from the highest level elected official at the local level. But they also say, well, I also don't want to appear to be giving up shirking my responsibilities and giving it to the state also. At the end of the day, to talk real politique, at the end of the day, local elected officials have to fundraise, and they fundraise off of people that are looking to change zoning for their specific desires, business or residential, whatever, what have you. Yeah. That's the primary function of local elected officials. And so, they see this as an encroachment on their ability to get reelected, on their ability to show that they've done something. And I think that hits hard in areas that are maybe more tense politically, where there's a lot more competition locally. I think having somebody like you, Jennifer, in Virginia would have definitely helped. Would definitely help. I certainly think that to be the case. But we don't have enough people who are able to, bridge over the conversation with the business community, with the local elected officials, to tell them, hey, let's just play this role. I'll end this quick comment with, I was invited to the Virginia Municipal League to attend their conference. That's the I guess the organization that brings together all the localities together to meet, cities, counties, and towns in one forum. They have a 3-day conference coming up. I'm invited to speak to them all the time. But when it comes to when they are deciding what their legislative platform is, they always buck me, right? They always want to learn. They always want to learn what to do, but they never want to do it. And so how to move that forward? I think I had a simple conversation with one of the leaders in that organization before, and I said, what do you need? They said, well, things are going to move a little slowly right now. It's not really going to move fast, and I know you want it to move faster. And I want to definitely bring it back eventually to this conversation, but it definitely has to do with socioeconomic status. It has to do with racial background, ethnic background, religious backgrounds. That is a big crux of this issue. It's not said, it's hidden. But just as our past was filled with redlining, today it's just another form of it. It's modern day redlining. We haven't talked about it yet. We need sticks in addition to carrots, not just carrots. We have a lot of carrots in Virginia. We don't have enough sticks on anti-discrimination and zoning.
Thank you. I want to just give Melissa the opportunity to maybe put one question out there to each of you for, a 30-second kind of answer. And then I want to sort of bring us to conclusion. But Melissa, why don't I just turn it to you for, one question that each of our guests here can respond to.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I think Zach Subin, who's submitted this question from the audience, it's a great closing one. He says, I'm wondering about the title of the panel on the generational dynamics of the issue. As millennial legislators, have you found ways to talk to older folks who may have had very different experiences with the housing market? So I think if each of you could speak to that, that'd be a great closing question.
Senator Hansen, let's start with you.
Sure. Yes, and this ties into earlier when you talked about coalition building. We had our local AARP was a strong proponent of some of our housing bills when we're talking about kind of retirees, seniors wanting to downsize, and they want, affordable, walkable, maybe desires. And that's been a good thing, and using kind of from that perspective. One I haven't necessarily implemented, but we have just started. Heard it in a hearing about a month ago. I was talking about neighborhoods and units for first-time and last-time home buyers, such that a retired couple and a new couple are likely looking for probably some comparable, similar, prioritizing affordability, accessibility, probably public transportation, things of that nature. That's actually a pretty cross-generational desire, and that some of these neighborhoods, apartments, whatever they end up being, could bridge both groups.
Thank you. Speaker Fecteau, how are you using your millennial status to be accessible to all?
Well, I think it's actually been pretty easy, because so many of my colleagues in the legislature or folks outside of the legislature, they bought homes for far less than what's on the market today. And they can see that, they can see how drastically the prices have increased, and the burden that's already on folks in my generation. Not only are houses more expensive, not only is there fewer places to rent, but we also are sacked with tons of student loan debt. And I think they really can see, just by the numbers, the impact that the current crunch has had on young people like me. But the way we can build the bridge, to Senator Hansen's point, is the fact that older Mainers and older adults are in similar positions. They find themselves in no better place than the young people in their communities, because they're trying to age out of their homes. They can't maintain them anymore on their own, and they go to look for maybe communal living, congregate settings, and there isn't anything out there. We have long wait lists for older Mainers as well to find affordable, smaller units to live in. So they are experiencing this crunch as well. And I'm hearing from a lot of sons and daughters of older Mainers who want to build in-law apartments onto their existing properties, and they are unable to do so because of zoning laws. So I think there's a real bridge here between older adults and younger adults who are experiencing the same kind of crunch, just at different parts of their lives.
Thank you. Last word from Delegate Samirah. How are you using your millennial voice to build bridges?
Well, first of all, forgive me. I think they're starting to do some renovations upstairs.
Okay.
It's shout out to the AARP, shout out to Virginia Conservation Network, shout out to the NAACP. First of all, they are partners in this work, and they are new partners, and they are going to continue. These are people that in your localities, also in your states, to my colleagues, Senator Hansen and Speaker Fecteau, they exist. My most accessory dwelling unit bill that I had, when I approached my colleagues for co-sponsorship, I called it the granny flat bill. And it was the most co-sponsored bill out of all my housing bills that I've introduced. 28 bills, 28 co-sponsors, a couple of Republicans along the way as well. So that was, the language, going back to, Jennifer, what you were saying earlier, saw a gentle density versus destroying my suburb. It does make a big difference in the conversation. Sometimes you can't control the narrative, though, and it is what it is. I didn't answer your question, but I hope I gave you some good closing thoughts on that front, as far as how you appeal to the older generations. At the end of the day, they need it. They need affordable housing as much as young people, just as Speaker Fecteau was saying. And the more we intertwine the generational aspect of this, the more likely we are to pass these bills, especially with partners like the AARP.
Well, and I think your story about your mother, is very compelling too. I know we're a little over time, so I just want to thank all of you, Speaker Fecteau, Delegate Samirah, and Senator Hansen, for joining us here today. And we really appreciate your stories and your wisdom, and best wishes to all of you as you finish out your terms. So thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much.